there's going to be a huge rush of the crowd. There's going to be like double the numbers in here. So, well, excellent. Well, I have to ask. I don't know if anybody who follows me on Twitter saw my tweet about this session and came because you thought I was going to perform this presentation through interpretive dance. Anyone? All right. I'm sorry. I've been barred from doing so. This is it's a topic that I'm sure some of you have this question, want to understand. Maybe get a show of hands. How many people are interested in this topic because you've done it and you want to know what you've done? Or the second class of people are those who, their organizations, somebody's saying, we need to turn this off, and you're fighting it, and you want to be able to go back and explain, this is what you'll break. Yeah, that's the more common scenario. Third, you're interested in taking up interpretive dance and you're looking for material that would best support. Yes, excellent. So what happens when you disable sharing? So I've got some slides. This is a quick run-through conversation topic. I've got some important information, and at the end of this, I'm going to tell you where to go to find out how you go to do the thing which I recommend strongly that you don't do. Because everybody kept asking for that. It's like, yes, I understand all that. Yes, I'll take the responsibility. I still want to do it. Like, all right, I'll help you out with that as well. So talking about there's a lot of investment that Microsoft has been making, if you haven't noticed, about making the experiences within, whether it's across PowerPoint and Word and OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams and Yammer and all these things, being very consistent. So the experiences when I go and if I click that share button a year and a half ago, do you remember clicking share anywhere? The menu items, the experience was very different in every single application. And now it's fairly consistent. You see that with, especially with OneDrive and SharePoint, where it's essentially the same thing. Well, the secret sauce is that it essentially is the same thing. And so that the experiences when I'm sharing something else out, when I'm saving something down locally or out to the cloud, it should be a consistent experience. And so the expectations are that they'll be seamless, that they'll be the same. We do expect this to be consistent. In fact, a lot of the feedback to the product team from the MVP community especially, I guess I should introduce myself too, but I was just so excited to jump into this. But so I'm a Microsoft MVP. I've been in the Office apps and services space for almost a decade, so for 9 years now. And I'm I'm not the typical consultant. I'm a marketing consultant. I work with ISVs. So I've developed products, and a decade ago I worked for Microsoft and helped launch Office 365. And the type of feedback that I've been giving back personally to the product teams has been fairly consistent. Like, why is it that when I go over to this product, it behaves this way and another way? And a lot of the feedback that we provide from the MVP community back to the product team, we have this annual summit every March now. And a lot of it is like, there's this great new feature, this third party, this competitive product out there that does it this way and it's better. You guys should go take a look at it. And so part of that is, if you've ever done UX testing, user experience testing, where the consultants, they ask you, say, what were you trying to accomplish there? What was the expected behavior? What did you actually see? Why are you clicking there and not over here? And tell me why you're doing this. And a lot of it just comes from there's a natural, an organic way to go and develop a lot of the UX. And when the user design is contrary to the way that we expect, we have some conflict there, some self-conflict, or we don't use the feature. But certainly if the capabilities are not as robust, then we kind of thrash against that. So the other side of this is that we have an expectation that there are tools. Don't lock me down. Allow me to go out and share with whomever I want to share, wherever I want to share. And so this is very consistent across the Office 365 platform. So I have kind of a Buckley-ism when I go and I present on collaboration and productivity. I say this again and again. Greg, you're going to recognize this, but the more controls you put on a system, the less likely people will use that system. And I've worked for years with admin, governance, security vendors, with ISVs, building products. I worked, if anybody remembers, Exceller. I was the chief evangelist at Exceller. They got bought by Metalogix, which is now bought by Quest. AvePoint has been a client of mine, of friends with the ShareGate guys, and all these other vendors that are out there. And we have kind of these consistent feedback, is that while we give you the ability, these tools give you the ability to do more granular controls, and Microsoft is giving you more granular control within the platform, it doesn't mean you should go lock it down. It doesn't mean that you should turn certain things on and off. Just be careful with that user experience. Because what happens, and this is certainly true if anybody's coming from the SharePoint space, which is a lot of my background, is the more locked down you make that system, people will go and do the shadow IT initiative. They'll go around IT to get work done. And so that is true with sharing. So I'm going to walk through all of the functional implications of disabling within the cloud, and specifically, this was kind of initially geared as OneDrive, and of course OneDrive and SharePoint, OneDrive for Business and SharePoint are the same underlying technology with SharePoint on the back end, so the impacts are fairly consistent across this. But this is typically the conversation starts with organizations when they're trying to control how people are using OneDrive. And the thought is that, well, SharePoint, we've got more granular control over this. Well, OneDrive is a subset of SharePoint and acts the same way and has some of the same impacts here. So organizations have problems with the governance implications. Do I have the ability to go? Do I have visibility into who's doing what and where? And somehow I'll lose control if I allow this sharing to happen. Or it means that I like the controls in one application but not across the board. Again, it's a control issue. This is a real concern. They're concerned that file sharing could result in unauthorized external users gaining full control of the company's IP. That could happen, not through the tool, the technology, but because of employees sharing something that they maybe shouldn't share. Does that mean that you should go and punish everyone in every scenario from sharing, or do you manage the policies? Do you do more of the community management to teach employees of what's proper and what's not proper, but still have some controls? You do need to have some controls and visibility. I like to refer to that as the guidelines. You need to have strong standards and guidelines, the rails. Hold the rail as you're moving forward so that you don't trip and fall. And then they're, of course, concerned about anonymous guest links being created and shared and what the impacts are there. And then they want to limit the visibility and control over who can do what within the platform. And I always say that you should be less concerned about this. Obviously, if there's financial data, if there's intellectual property, if it needs to be much more secure, but there are other things that you can do. You can go in. You don't, across the board, shut down sharing. What you do is you set up, like with Teams, a private channel or a secure Yammer group. Now they're not calling them groups, sorry. A new, I'm sorry? Oh, community, that's right. Boy, that's a tough word for me. Yeah, so the communities. Or creating a SharePoint team site that is secure and limited and who has access to that. You do those things, limit the accessibility, limit the control and to this smaller subset of your organization, not have this blanket rule that makes it difficult for everyone to use the technology. And their control, again, it goes back to that compliance, that tracking, that visibility in the activity. So the problem is that when you go and you shut down, you make changes, it's at the tenant level. So it's an all or nothing approach. And so it's because OneDrive and SharePoint behind that, it's part of that client backstage for all of those capabilities. When you turn it off, the problem with that is that the user experience, they then start seeing those gaps. They see those holes. And you think of that over time, and Microsoft is improving on some of those experiences, but it would be like, I have the ability to share a link with someone, but when I click on it, it gets to that 404. It gets to you do not have permissions to get access to that. And sometimes, in a limited scope, that's an accepted user experience where you want them, okay, I've hit the limits of this and request permission to go and have access to that. For other user experiences, it's not a great experience. So the prompts themselves can't be disabled because they're working as designed, and so you also can't modify the menu options as well. So you just need to be concerned about the impacts of this. So from a security and compliance standpoint, you can't also then go and do those things which are cross workload. You disable the capability, it then limits some of the feature set that you have within the product. And so I'll get in and talk about some of those examples. So here's what stops working from a user experience. So number one, the SharePoint home. It's disabled because everything is stored within the OneDrive cache. As part of that too, which makes sense, is the followed sites. They're also disabled because again, everything comes from that OneDrive. It's part of that primary user experience. The shared with me list is obviously disabled because no one's sharing anything with you. The modern attachments are entirely disabled. And this is something that I highly recommend for organizations that are starting to make the move towards the cloud, is to go in and change the default settings so that by default, if I go to send somebody a file via Outlook, that the default experience is that if it's not already in the cloud, that the system automatically uploads that content to the cloud. It's something you can do company-wide, organization-wide. It's something that if it's not done organization-wide, you as a user can go into Outlook and say, by default, I want to insert a link rather than a file. Well, that ability, those modern attachments, is actually disabled because it doesn't have a place to go and store that. So you can do things manually still, but the modern attachments is disabled. The Teams site in Microsoft Teams sync to OneDrive is also disabled because of that. So it impacts that sync capability. You can still do some things manually, but the auto sync. OneNote, of course, which I live and breathe in the application. It's part of my daily routine with every single client and the OneNotes around that and the offline sync to that. All of that is disabled as well. And then external users, and this is painful. If you do have links out there, if you have external users who are actively working with these shared links today, they stop working. When you turn it back on, they don't start working again. You have to resend out links to all of those things. So it does disrupt the normal flow of business if people are using this today. So some of the other degraded experiences that happen by disabling this. So it's kind of a pain here. So when you disable it, users see options for OneDrive and business attachments, and they'll be prompted for things that they can't do. And so they'll get even more error messages. This is one of those things where Microsoft tries to clean up some of those experiences, but so much of what Microsoft's trying to do relies on the fact that you've not turned this off. Graph and Delve and a lot of the other artificial intelligence capabilities, these features, they're also going to be seriously impact because they rely on that sharing capability and the visibility into what's being shared. It understands who you are, the content that you own, the relationships that you have, and what's moving between you and your team members, and it essentially turns that off and cripples that capability. So this becomes just a kind of an emptier experience. There's just not going to be that much that's going to surface. As I mentioned before, the most recently used list, it'll still work, but it loses a lot of that richness from those other locations. So rather than disable, Microsoft's guidance, is just kind of high level, says, look, there's a lot of other things that you could go and do, an organization could put policy in place. So I mentioned community management. That's the number one strategy, is to go in there and say, why are we shutting this down? What are our concerns? How can we mitigate these concerns without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And so it can be through policy. It can be through a restructure of where your content is to ensure that sensitive intellectual property are in locations that have the proper controls in place, but that for the majority of the way that we interact, When I'm collaborating with somebody, I'm sending them, I'm just not doing attachments like I do. In fact, in our user group locally, I was openly mocking our leader, Greg, for sending email attachments and pointing out and shaming him publicly for sending an attachment. Of course, I sent an attachment back, so I guess I know. Twice. Thank you, Greg. So rather than disable, diminishing those features, so establishing policies for the handling of this information, and it could be that if you're in the finance team, that you have things tightly locked down, you limit who has access to this, you have you have these tighter controls in place. But not for the entire organization. So some examples of things that you can do. So enabling information rights management policies, actually going in and leveraging those. A lot of people don't. They're using the out-of-the-box experience and they don't take the time to go set up these policies and understand these other additional capabilities. Creating allow and deny lists, so that if you have concerns where you only want to allow interaction with designated partners. You can even have a process in place where somebody says, hey, I'm not able to communicate with this new customer or share with the new customer or a new partner, and then IT can have a process for them, adding them to this allow list, so you can designate IP ranges in specific domains that you can collaborate with and allow that capability. And then putting as a policy the mandatory expiration limits. And you could do that, again, at a tenant level, so that it's a pain in the butt sometimes. When you're in there, when it's going to be a longer-term project and you have 3, 5, or 7-day expiration on shared links. But then again, when you're sharing something actively, it shouldn't be sitting out there for 30, 60, 90 days with that link, because that's where you start running into those compliance and security issues. Because of that kind of sloppy non-policy, that's why you just need to be stricter with this. But something you can do without turning it off, go put these policies in place. There's also sharing guidelines and then monitoring that content movement. That second one, that's harder to do. This takes a lot of effort to go and monitor and provide feedback. This is part of the community management aspect of it. Understand how your teams are collaborating, where they are being unsecure, where they're being non-compliant, where you have concerns about some of the habits in the sharing, where you can go have conversations, you can learn and modify your policies, get more detailed around your community management. And then regularly audit all these systems and all this content. That's the key there, is ensuring that you are on top of this, that you're paying attention. So OneDrive sharing is powerful. External sharing is powerful here to not move forward. But when organizations turn that off, then they really impact collaboration. As I said at the beginning, the more that you control the system, the less likely people will use that system. That should be your number one concern, is security and compliance are important, but also adoption and engagement. If you are through policy, and because you're not going and taking the extra steps in ensuring that there are policies and procedures in place, and then allowing people to freely collaborate, setting those guide rails, but then not dictating how people collaborate, that will then force them to go to this shadow IT route and go around you. Then they start sending intellectual property via email, or they go in a non-compliant third-party cloud storage service and sharing files and IP. Then that person leaves the company, gets hit by a bus, and they're gone, and you have zero visibility into where that IP exists. So Microsoft does recognize that, hey, there are specific requirements. Your organization, you might say, I'm special, we need to turn this off. I understand all these implications, but still, we turn this off. And so this is where I said, if you're still convinced you want to go do the thing we've told you not to do, I've got 2 slides here. You can go and download. Of course, the information's all available out on docs.microsoft.com. But you could go in and shut down sharing on OneDrive and SharePoint files and folders, or change the permissions altogether. So so here's the link here in support.office.com. But going in there at that tenant level, shut that down. And then the other slide that I have, the part 2 to this, is you can even customize how sharing works, and you can make it very restrictive. And just understand that when you're sharing, when you're setting the sharings for OneDrive, you're really talking about SharePoint. And so you can have stricter controls on OneDrive than SharePoint, but just realize that if you have strict controls on SharePoint, it automatically impacts OneDrive. So you do have the ability to go in there. Again, here's like the settings for shareable links, saying, hey, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, whatever you want to set as that policy. That's as good as these links work. But you have the ability to go and do that. So you go find the slides, you get those 2, follow the links, and if you want to go don't do it, people, don't do it. But you have the information out there and available. And of course, if you got some feedback, if you got some other questions, you can reach me at Buckley Planet on Twitter. My email is really easy, cbuck, C-B-U-C-K, @collabtalk.com. And I'm happy to answer any other detailed questions you might have. And I'll stick around here for a few more minutes to answer questions. And that's 20 minutes, folks. Thanks a lot.